must read for fans of Stephen King and John Ajvide Lindqvist. Elizabeth Hahn. This is Blood Cruise. What matters the most when the world is ending? The end. Sweden has a new horror king. The Home. And this is The Conference, and all these 4 books, they are written by the Swedish writer Mats Strandberg, and this is my interview with Mats. And we did this talk in the English Bookshop Uppsala / Stockholm, and thank you Jan and Christer for letting me be in your awesome space. Now, this is my talk with Mats. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, my name is Mats Strandberg and I'm a Swedish writer of horror, sci-fi and fantasy. I also have really bad pollen allergies, so let's see what happens. Well, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home where there were a lot of books, basically, and my parents always read to me, and some of my first memories is that I'm biting my own arm just so I won't fall asleep, so I can hear just one more fairy tale, right? And I was really fascinated by scary stuff already when I was a kid. I really preferred the grim fairy tales to the Disney versions, and I was really fascinated by all the gory stuff, you know, like Cinderella's sisters, how they cut off their own heels and toes to be able to fit their feet into the glass slipper. Stuff like that really made me scared, but also fascinated. Yeah, so I mean, it's always been part of my life, part of my upbringing. My mother was very ill when I grew up, and I mean, we couldn't do much. She was very isolated and stuck at home. So that was basically our way of doing things together, was reading, and sometimes reading the same books when I grew up a bit and discuss that. So I have very fond memories of reading. And then, I mean, since I was such an early reader, I also went on to discover Stephen King when I was 10, which was much too young. I was really scared, obviously, and I even got what do you call it, like rashes from being so stressed out, and I couldn't sleep. I remember once we were on a vacation with a caravan, is that what you call it? And I was like kicking my feet so much when I read Salem's Lot that the whole, thing was shaking. But weirdly enough, my family let me keep on reading. Horror movies were very much forbidden, but I could read anything I wanted, so. Well, I was kind of a weird kid, I guess. I wasn't very good at interacting with other kids. I was better at talking to adults, and yeah, I wasn't very popular, basically, and we didn't have a lot of other kids in the neighborhood, so there was a lot of time spent reading and making up my own stories and making, I used to love Mad magazine, so I used to do my own, parody cartoons of TV shows I liked and stuff. So yeah, I guess stories was always my way of having adventures and having fun, and I don't remember ever being bored, because I always enjoyed playing on my own. Which is good, I guess. Yeah, and I think that what was so magical about, I mean, my parents were really generous in the sense we didn't have a lot of money, but they were, they always said, like, oh, he doesn't do sports, we're never going to have to pay for, soccer camp or hockey sticks or, all that stuff, so we can just let him buy as much books as he wants. And the 80s were an amazing time for a kid like me, because there was so much, trash literature that I think has finally started to get more of a, being more recognized now. Stephen King being the obvious example, but also Dean R. Koontz and I mean, I loved Sidney Sheldon and Jackie Collins, and I really loved Virginia Andrews, V.C. Andrews. Her books were really like an injection straight into my heart of everything forbidden and scary and weird about adults, you know. And so that they just let me read all these crazy things and never, you know, hesitated. That was very good of them. And I think that, I mean, sometimes I understand parents who are like, oh, Twilight, that doesn't have that such great, you know, qualities or such great messaging. But I mean, as long as the kids read, that's a good start. And then if probably most of them are, well, at least they have a better chance of actually finding good books later on in life. Because that's what happened to me. I acquired some taste after a while as well. But I still think that those 80s ones are still good books. I mean, there's really good storytelling and there's a lot of, you know, action-packed intrigue. And I'm still quite inspired by those books in the sense that I want my books to also be just like open arms, you know, welcome. We're going to sit down and you're going to have a good time. It's going to be a fun ride. Enjoy, you know, fasten your seatbelts. So that's sort of what I want to do as well as a writer. I mean, I guess it came naturally to me to try to write my own books sooner or later. I actually wrote my own autobiography when I was 5, I think. I didn't have that an exciting of a life, so I stole most of the stuff from Astrid Lindgren and other Swedish children's books authors. I lied a lot. But I guess my first real try, I actually finished a novel when I was 16 or 17, and it almost got published, which I'm very happy now that it never was, because it wasn't that, well, first of all, it wasn't that great, but also I would have been an unbearable brat if I got published when I was 17. I would have been so full of myself. But it was I'm kind of amazed now that I actually finished a whole script for a book, and that it's at least turned out so well that it was just on the cusp of being accepted by one of the big Swedish publishers. That's kind of crazy. It was very inspired by everything I loved at the time. So again, Stephen King, Virginia Andrews, Bret Easton Ellis, and The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. That was sort of the mix. So it was drugs and some monsters, some incest, some ballet, and I don't know, some demons, I guess. I don't remember so much. But yeah, so that's my first try, and then I guess it's one of those dreams that just came and went throughout the years. I became a journalist and wrote columns, so I had a way of expressing myself through my work, my regular work, but still kept on dreaming every now and then of becoming a writer. Well, actually, the reason I'm not going to say the reason I became an author, but a big part of the reason, I guess, is that I was working as a journalist for a TV station here in Sweden, and I had a burnout, I guess. I had to go on sick leave for almost a year. And that was terrible, and it's not a method that I recommend to anyone, but it made me, it forced me to take a step back and be like, okay, how did I get here? What happened? And why am I fighting so hard for something that's not even that interesting? It's not like I was a doctor saving lives, you know. I was just writing pretty empty, silly stuff for an entertainment part of the TV station's website. So nothing wrong with that, but it wasn't like fulfilling my soul. And then sort of different things just sort of happened at the same time. As I was on this sick leave, I was allowed to keep writing columns I did for a magazine called QX, and as I was on the sick leave, I actually was awarded Columnist of the Year by this really prestigious journalist organization. So that day after that, the newspaper started ringing and I got offers, and suddenly I had this column in Swedish, in Sweden's biggest newspaper, weekly column, and that made me able to just quit the job that made me sick and start, freelancing. And so I decided that, okay, but these columns are actually well paid enough that I can pay the most important bills, and the rest of the time I'm going to try to write that book once and for all. And so I did, and that's what became our first book. So I have that terrible time to thank for a lot, I guess. It's like that Dickens thing, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I mean, it's always so difficult to answer where ideas come from, because it's sort of 5 years after the book comes out that you can really start to puzzle it together and see what your subconscious sort of needed to work on. But I guess I have a horror filter in my brain, so that, when I have an interesting discussion with a friend, I always but what about if a monster arrived, or what if something terrible added to this already difficult situation? Or if my first real horror novel was Blood Cruise, and it takes place on these really infamous cruise ships between Sweden and Finland, and I was on one of those cruises. A friend of mine had a 40th birthday party, and I walked around these long, maze-like corridors with wall-to-wall carpets, and I was like, oh, this looks like The Shining. I started joking about that, and then something got stuck, and then I started thinking about the Alien movies, how it's about this vessel in a sort of eternal darkness. It just felt like something similar, so I guess that's just how my brain works. And then I started, tormenting my friends with questions about what if there were monsters aboard? What would you do? Where would you hide? What do you think would be the best, part of this? Or the best plan to either try to get help from land, or try to get off the boat, and how would you do it? Could you sink the life rafts down into the water while the ferry was moving? Everyone was very tired of me by the time we got back to Stockholm, but I had sort of an idea for a book, so that was good. And my latest book here in Sweden, The Konferensen, is about a very dysfunctional group of people who work together and who are having a conference in a secluded little area by a lake. And a crazy killer is on the loose, seeking revenge. So it's a bit, Agatha Christie meets Friday the 13th. Or at least that was my goal. And that idea came from just, thinking so much about work relationships and listening to my friends bitch and whine about colleagues, and how some of my best relationships in my life are from people I work with, so it can be amazing as well. But a bad work relationship can be the worst relationship of your life, and there's nothing that can make you as bad of a partner or father or friend. You just keep on, it's so frustrating, and it's also such a weird situation that you're spend more than half of your awake time with these people you haven't chosen for yourselves. So that's where I started to think about that, this feels very unused in literature, to me at least. so yeah, I guess ideas can sort of pop up from anywhere, and then it just makes sense somehow. You start finding characters that suit the plot or the theme, or just things that you've obviously been longing to explore, I guess. I think all books are really about what the author wants to, you know, deal with, but maybe doesn't even know him or herself. Well, when I start a new project, I usually do loads and loads of research. So that can be anything from, you know, going back and forth on these ferries between Sweden and Finland a million times and taking notes and interviewing people who work there in different capacities and things like that. The environment itself can be really there can be a lot of things you have to find out, but it's also really inspiring to me. You can really get great material for characters when you understand more about the place you're writing about. I would say that the place is actually what it usually starts with, you know, or the basic elevator pitch. You know, I get this really simple idea and then build from there. And then research can also be things like, if I have a character with a certain background, I look at, I mean, maybe read a lot of biographies with people who remind me of that character in some sense, or interview people who have been in similar situations. It can be anything, basically. And then when I've done all this research, I do character sheets that are really, really detailed, and a lot of things that never end up in the book, but it helps me sort of put the players on the stage and then see what happens. I know a lot of writers find out about their characters as they write, but I really try to sort of interview them. I act like a journalist. I interview them and I make playlists for them on Spotify and, you know, things like that. So I try to come prepared to when it's time, and then just start writing. And it's a pretty painful process for me to write, actually. I kind of hate writing the first draft. I love editing. I mean, editing to me is the fun part of the job, which is not that usual maybe with authors, but to me it's so unbearable to just, you know you have so many mistakes and so much stuff that doesn't work, and you realize things as you go along, and you have to, you know, start over or completely redraw the whole board. Nah, and you're so alone. You're so alone in your head with this fictional world that you spend almost all your waking time with, but no one knows about it. So it can drive you a little bit crazy. And so I just try to suffer through it until I have a first draft, and then I can show it to, well, my publishers, obviously, but also to some friends that I trust, and start discussing, like, what is this, and what do we think of it, and is there something that works here, and what do we like, what do we don't like, yeah, and just start, you know, it suddenly becomes real, and then it's so fulfilling to me to edit and just make it better, draft by draft by draft, and find more details, and, you know, plan stuff in advance, and yeah, just that's fun to me. And it also feels like a craft. It doesn't feel like you have to create stuff out of thin air and just hope that it works. You actually have something that you know that, okay, 90% is going to be gone and altered and shifted or whatever, but there is something you can sort of, there is gold in this river of shit, basically. And that's fun. Yeah. Well, we mentioned Stephen King quite a few times, and I'm a big fan of his autobiography, I guess you can call it, on writing. And what really stuck with me, or really resonated with me, was that thing about you're writing with the door closed, but you're editing with your door open. And to me, that rings very true, because I really need all these beta readers that I really, really trust. I want both genre nerds like me, who sort of understand really what I'm trying to do with a horror novel, but I also really value my friends who hate reading horror because I want to reach those readers as well. And of course, a lot of experts in different whatever area it might be that is important to the particular book. Of course, Sarah, that I wrote the English trilogy together with. I mean, we were work wife and work husband for 5 years, and she knows me and my writing better than anyone. So she's really important, and also my husband, Johan, who is now an author and a wonderful author, but he is also an actor and really good at analyzing dialogue and analyzing character. I also have psychologist friends, so it's a lot of people. It takes a village. No, but I mean, I just really appreciate every input I can get from as many different people as possible. Well, not as possible, but it's selected. I would say 15 people in the end of a book has read it and added comments and thoughts, and to me it just feels like such a shortcut to I just like, you know, bouncing ideas of other people as well and see what happens, and yeah, it's also fun for me. It's like playing, even if you're an adult. You can finally, yeah, that kid who didn't know how to play with other kids can finally play with his peers. That's great. It's always so difficult to answer why you love horror. I guess there's a million reasons. And I can have a lot of theories, but first and foremost, it's good stories, you know. Of course, there's a lot of crap, but there's a lot of crap in every genre, so, you know. But I think that there's something quite special about horror, that when it's good, it's really, to me, the best genre for asking these really big questions about good or bad, good or evil, moral dilemmas, dark and light, life and death, you know, all these things. And it's also something that really goes straight for the, you know, the emotional center of the brain. It's very, it sort of shuts off my constant over intellectualizing of everything, and just takes me for a fun ride, I guess. So that's the main reason why I love reading horror, but also writing horror, because writing horror is like reading horror, but times 1,000, you know. And to me, it has also always been like, it's almost like going on a roller coaster, or I don't know what else to compare it to, but it's like a safe way of sort of, you know, like a I lost the word in English, but it's like a way of letting off some steam, because I'm a person who worries a lot and thinks a lot about everything that can go wrong in my life, big and small, and the whole world. And sometimes you need to just have some catharsis from that. And then if you do it in a fictional horror way, you can go through those emotions and you can be really scared, while also knowing that you can always shut off the movie, or you can close the book if it gets too much, or if it's not right. And so, I mean, to me, consuming horror has always felt therapeutic, actually. And my psychologist said that that it's actually quite really good for me to write horror as well, because this incredible imagination that I have for everything that can go wrong has been a real problem to me. But now I can actually use it for something useful and creative. So that's good, instead of just imagining all these things that are probably not going to happen. So yeah, and I'm really. It's so strange to me here in Sweden that we have such an aversion to the horror genre. We don't really still take it seriously. I mean, if you compare it to England, for example, where Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Dracula and all these big classics are very, of course it's horror, no one would say anything different, but here in Sweden we have, I mean, Ingmar Bergman did amazing horror movies like Hour of the Wolf and Virgin Spring. Selma Lagerlöf, amazing ghost writer, not ghost writer, but writer of ghost stories. Astrid Lindgren wrote some amazing fantasy novels, but we don't call it that. We just call it, oh, an Ingmar Bergman movie or a Selma Lagerlöf novel, you know. So we like to pretend that we don't have any horror in the canon, but we do. And I think that's about to change, actually, because I've noticed such a big difference just these last 10 years as a writer in this genre that finally people who are my age and younger, who grew up with Stephen King and Harry Potter or what have you, work at the cultural sections of the newspapers, or they work as librarians, or work in bookstores, or they're the, you know, up and coming power players or whatever, tastemakers of different kinds, and it's so satisfying to see this shift finally here in Sweden. It's it really makes me happy, and if I have you know, added to that in any way, John Ajvide Lindqvist definitely has with Let the Right One In and his other novels. Yeah, it just makes me happy on a very personal level, actually, not just as a writer, but really as a horror lover. Well, the future. Well, I just published this new horror novel here in Sweden, The Konferensen, and of course I hope that it's going to be published in English as well, as my previous books have. It's done really, really well here in Sweden very quickly, so I think the chances are good. But what I'm working on now is some movie and TV projects that you, of course, never know. You never know if it's going to happen. I think the next thing that will be published here in Sweden is next year, hopefully, we'll be finished with a graphic novel that me and a graphic novel artist friend of mine is working on, where a reality show, sort of like Paradise Hotel or Bachelor in Paradise, you know, those kind of shows, meets the Spanish Inquisition. So there's a lot of bikinis and blood. We're having a lot of fun. And then I have some, I have a list of like 10, 15 novels that I know I really, really want to write. So I guess I'm going to have to choose soon. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to keep you up at night and give you lots of nightmares and some rashes, maybe.